when my daughter-in-law looked me dead in the eye and said, "This family doesn't need you anymore." I didn't cry, I didn't argue, and I didn't beg. I just set my teacup down, locked up my half of the house, and quietly made them pay for every single word. "This family doesn't need you anymore," Vanessa said, looking me dead in the eye. My son, Garrett, sat right next to her, staring at his laptop and staying completely silent, acting like none of this had anything to do with him. It was just a regular Tuesday evening in our house in Naperville, Illinois. I had just cleared the table, loaded the dishwasher, and was looking forward to sitting on the couch with a hot cup of chamomile tea. Instead, I was standing in the kitchen listening to my daughter-in-law completely redesign my life in a totally calm, almost business-like tone. She explained that starting next month, my master bedroom on the second floor was going to be the kids' new playroom. She suggested I move into the small bonus room over the garage since I barely used any space anyway. As I just stared at her in silence, Vanessa's mother, who was visiting, nodded along in approval. They honestly thought a 65-year-old widow like me would burst into tears, start begging, or quietly slink away into a corner. But they didn't know me at all. I didn't feel the urge to scream. Instead, everything in my head became crystal clear. This house still legally belonged to me, 50% of it anyway. Left to me after my husband passed away 5 years ago. Garrett had inherited the other half. And ever since they moved in 2 years ago, I had been stepping back bit by bit to give the young family space. I paid for the groceries, did the laundry, and basically acted like an unpaid, invisible housekeeper. That had been my mistake. Vanessa's smug little smirk told me everything I need to know. They took my kindness for weakness. I slowly set my teacup down and looked at Garrett one last time, but he avoided my eyes. Right then and there, I made a decision that would change everything. And they didn't have a single clue. I slept surprisingly well that night. At exactly 6 o'clock the next morning, I put on my coat and walked down to the local bakery, just like I did every day. But today, I only bought 2 pastries strictly for myself. When I got back, Vanessa was sitting in the kitchen, obviously waiting for the breakfast table to be set like usual. I walked right past her without a word, sat by the small window in the hallway, and ate my breakfast alone. She gave me a confused, annoyed look, but didn't say anything. Afterward, I went straight to my room and pulled the thick accordion file out of my closet. Inside were all the important documents: my husband's will, the deed, and the official property division agreement. The house was technically a legal duplex, split into 2 separate living units with their own independent electric and water meters. Up until now, we had just been splitting the bills informally, or rather, the utilities were auto-drafted from my account. And Garrett was supposed to give me his half in cash, which he had forgotten to do for months. I sat at my desk and ran the numbers down to the penny. Vanessa thought I was financially dependent on them because my Social Security check wasn't huge. What she didn't know was that I had a separate high-yield savings account my husband had set up for me. It was more than enough to start a fresh chapter. I wrote out 3 letters to the utility companies and the city office, requesting a strict separation of the accounts. Starting next month, everyone would pay exactly for what they used. As I sealed the last envelope, I heard Garrett's car pull into the driveway. It was time for the first real boundary that afternoon. I brought my husband's old toolbox up from the basement. Garrett was sitting in the living room watching TV while Vanessa was out grocery shopping. He looked up briefly as I started working on the interior door in the main hallway with a screwdriver. "What are you doing?" "Mom?" he asked casually. "I'm installing a deadbolt," I replied calmly, not missing a beat. "According to the property deed, the upper floor is my private apartment. Starting today, I'd like some privacy." Garrett let out a nervous chuckle. "Come on, Mom. We're family. Why are you locking yourself away?" "Because this family doesn't need me. Remember," I said, looking him straight in the eye as I tightened the final screw. His face turned bright red, and he quickly looked back down at his phone. When Vanessa came home 2 hours later with the kids from daycare, she tried to carry the laundry baskets up into my area like she always did. She pushed against the doorknob, but it didn't budge. I cracked open the small hallway window next to it. "Your laundry is going to need a new home. Vanessa, I'm using my space exclusively for myself from now on." She stared at me, completely flabbergasted. "You can't do that. Where are the kids' clothes supposed to go? That's for you two to figure out," I said quietly. Sliding the window shut and turning the lock, for the first time in years, I enjoyed absolute peace and quiet in my own space. No stray toys, no muddy footprints. But this was only the beginning. I could hear them arguing furiously downstairs, but nobody dared to knock on my door. Thursday was normally the day I did the big grocery run for the whole house. I drove to the supermarket, but I only bought non-perishable items that I could easily store in the small kitchenette upstairs. When I got back, I ran into Vanessa in the shared entryway. She gave me a triumphant look. "Garrett told me you separated the utility bills. That's fine by us. But just so you know, we won't be cooking for you anymore." She clearly thought this would hurt me. I just offered a faint smile. "That works out perfectly. I've been meaning to change up my diet anyway." Later that evening, when she opened the big refrigerator downstairs, the one I usually kept stocked to the brim, she found nothing but empty shelves. There was only a stick of butter and a carton of yogurt that belonged to her. No milk for coffee, no deli meat for Garrett, no fresh fruit for the kids. 10 minutes later, Garrett knocked on my door. He looked incredibly stressed. "Mom, didn't you go shopping? The kids are hungry and there's literally nothing in the house." I opened the door just a crack. "I bought groceries for myself." "Garrett, you're both adults. The grocery store down the street is open until 10. "But you've always—" he stammered. "That was before," I interrupted softly. "Before. I thought I was a valued member of this family. Now I know better. Enjoy your dinner." I shut the door. Downstairs, I heard Vanessa yelling, followed by the jingle of car keys. They had to drive out in the dark just to get basic groceries. They were finally realizing that taking me for granted came with a price. On Friday morning around 7, Vanessa shouted through my door. Her tone was noticeably less arrogant than it had been a few days ago. "Helena, can you pick up the kids from daycare this afternoon? Garrett has to work late and I have a hair appointment." I didn't even bother opening the door. "No, Vanessa, I have my own plans today." "But you have to. It's a huge appointment, and I'll lose my deposit if I cancel," she snapped, her voice rising. "Then you'll have to cancel it, or Garrett will have to leave work early." I called back through the wood. There was a long, heavy silence. And then I heard her stomping down the stairs. Of course, I didn't actually have any major plans. I spent the afternoon at the local park, reading a book on a bench and enjoying a latte at a little cafe I hadn't been to in years. It was wonderful. For the first time in a long time. I didn't feel like a burden. I felt like a woman who had finally reclaimed her time. When I pulled back into the driveway around 5, Garrett's car was already there. He had been forced to take off work early to get the kids. He was standing in the front yard looking completely overwhelmed while the toddlers threw tantrums on the lawn, and Vanessa yelled at him from the porch. In the past, I would have rushed over to help. Today, I just walked right past them with my head held high. Garrett looked at me with a mix of resentment and pure desperation. But I stayed ice cold. "If you're going to treat me like dead weight, you don't get to lean on me when things get heavy." While I was making dinner, my phone rang. It was the real estate agent I had called the day before. "If you enjoy spending time with quiet revenge, we would like to make a small request. Our team works carefully to select, edit, review, and produce each story. While AI tools may assist some parts of the process, every story is ultimately guided and checked by real people who care deeply about the quality of what we share. Since our YouTube monetization is not currently active, some viewers have asked whether there is another way to support the channel. If you feel comfortable doing so, you can support Quiet Revenge with the cost of a small cup of coffee. Patreon https://www.patreon.com/Quiet Revenge Family. Ko-fi https://quo-fi.com/Thestry Family. PayPal https://www.paypal.com/paypalm/Han Whether you choose to contribute or simply continue watching, we are sincerely grateful for your time, kindness, and support. The agent, Mr. Vance, was a sharp, professional man in his mid-50s. He arrived on Saturday morning while Garrett and Vanessa were still asleep. I showed him around my second-floor unit, pointed out the separate meters, and handed him the deed. The location is excellent, and the house is in great shape, he noted, nodding approvingly. Selling your half is legally very straightforward. Since this is zoned as a duplex with separate entrances, you can sell your portion to an outside buyer whenever you want. Your son has the right of first refusal, but if he can't buy you out, we can list it on the open market. I nodded. That was exactly what I wanted. I didn't want to ruin my son, but I needed to pull my equity out. My half of the property was worth about $280,000. With that money, I could easily buy a beautiful, maintenance-free condo downtown and still have plenty left over to travel. As Mr. Vance and I walked down the stairs, Garrett came out of the kitchen in his sweatpants. He froze when he saw the man holding a clipboard. "Who is this? Mom?" he asked, his voice rough. "This is Mr. Vance. He's assessing the property so I can list my half for sale," I said, casually as I walked by. Vanessa, who had overheard from the kitchen, came rushing out. "What do you mean? Sell? You can't just let some random stranger move in here. This is our house." "It's my half of the house, Vanessa," I corrected her politely. "And since I'm just dead weight around here, I've decided to take my weight elsewhere. You're more than welcome to buy me out. Mr. Vance will send over the formal paperwork." Vanessa's face went completely pale. She knew damn well they were drowning in credit card debt. The next 2 weeks were filled with a heavy, uncomfortable silence. Vanessa stopped trying to look at me, and Garrett avoided me whenever possible. They were clearly trying to play chicken with me, hoping I would change my mind or that it was all just an empty bluff to scare them. But I didn't waste any time. I used those days to pack up my personal belongings, organize old photo albums into bins, and donate clothes I didn't need anymore. Every box I taped up felt like lifting a heavy weight off my chest. I realized just how much energy I had wasted over the last 2 years trying to keep everyone else happy. One afternoon, I ran into Garrett alone by the mailbox. He looked exhausted, with dark circles bruising the skin under his eyes. "Mom, do we really have to take it this far?" he asked quietly. "Can't we just sit down and talk?" We did talk. "Garrett," I said, keeping my voice steady. "Vanessa made it perfectly clear how she felt about me being here, and you agreed with her through your silence. I'm just doing what's best for everyone." "She didn't mean it like that," he muttered, offering a weak defense. "She meant exactly what she said. And you know it," I replied, taking my mail and walking back inside. My sympathy had completely run dry. When you choose to stay silent during the moments that matter, you have to live with the consequences of that silence. The next day, Mr. Vance sent the official intent to sell notice to Garrett. They had exactly 14 days to match the offer. The clock was ticking. By the 11th day of the notice period, the pressure became too much for them to bear. It was a rainy Wednesday evening when Garrett knocked timidly on my door. Vanessa was standing right behind him, and she looked like a completely different person. There wasn't a trace of the arrogant woman from 3 weeks ago. "Can we please come in?" Garrett asked in a near whisper. I stepped aside, letting them into my neat, half-packed living room. They sat down on the edge of the sofa, and Vanessa held a manila folder tightly in her lap. "Mom," Garrett started, "we went to the bank. We can't buy out your half. The interest rates are too high right now, and our debt-to-income ratio isn't good enough to get another $280,000 mortgage." "I figured as much," I replied calmly, pouring myself a glass of water. Vanessa took over, her voice trembling slightly. "Helena, if you sell to a stranger, we don't know who is going to move in up here. If it's a loud family or someone awful, our lives downstairs will be miserable. Please, let's find another way. We can start paying you some rent for your room." I almost had to laugh at the sheer audacity. "Vanessa, you called me a burden 3 weeks ago. Now you're asking me to leave my entire net worth tied up in this house just to protect your lifestyle. That's not going to happen." "We're sorry," Vanessa blurted out. Tears welled up in her eyes, but I could tell they were tears of panic, not genuine regret. "I'm sorry. I was just stressed out." "Apologies don't change the numbers," I said coldly. "I already have a serious cash buyer, an older retired couple from out of town. They're ready to close." The couple, the Harpers, were incredibly pleasant people. They were looking for a quiet place to downsize and had absolutely no issue with a young family living downstairs, as long as the property lines and responsibilities were crystal clear. The closing date with the notary was set for the following Friday. The evening before, I asked Garrett to come upstairs one last time. I explicitly told him Vanessa wasn't invited. I wanted to handle this strictly with my son. I laid a legal agreement on the table that I had drawn up. "This is your final notice. Garrett," I said, pushing the paper toward him. "I'm signing the house over to the Harpers tomorrow, but I had my agent include a strict addendum regarding the shared basement and backyard usage. If you or Vanessa violate these boundaries, the Harpers have the right to build a dividing fence and partition the basement entirely at your expense. Furthermore, you will wire me the $4,500 in unpaid utility bills you owe me from the past year by tomorrow morning. If that money isn't in my account, I won't sign with the Harpers. Instead, I'll lease this upper unit to a group of local college students, and you know exactly what that will do to your peace and quiet." Garrett swallowed hard, staring at the breakdown of the numbers. He knew I held all the cards, and he knew a house full of college kids would turn their lives into a living hell. "I'll do the transfer tonight," he said quietly, his hand shaking as he signed the addendum. I took the paper, slipped it into my purse, and knew the battle was won. 3 months later, I was sitting on the balcony of my brand new condo on the 3rd floor of a modern building in downtown Naperville. The view overlooked the bustling streets below, and I could hear the faint, pleasant hum of the weekend farmers market. My new place was bright, modern, and best of all, it was entirely mine. The move had been completely seamless. The Harpers had moved into the old house right on schedule. And according to one of my old neighbors, Vanessa had become incredibly quiet and polite. It turned out Mr. Harper was a retired military man who didn't hesitate for a single second to enforce the property rules and HOA guidelines. Garrett calls me about once a week now. He asks how I'm doing and occasionally invites me out for coffee. I accept every now and then, but I keep my distance. I don't go back to their house when we do see each other. We meet at a neutral spot downtown. Our relationship is more like a polite business arrangement now, cordial, distant, and completely stripped of any false illusions. Vanessa is never present at these meetings, which suits me just fine. They learned the hard way that respect isn't an optional luxury you can strip away from someone just because you think they've outlived their usefulness. I took a sip of my fresh coffee and breathed in the warm afternoon air. I wasn't a burden, and I certainly wasn't deadweight. I was a completely free woman who took control of her own destiny the moment they tried to push her aside. And that feeling of freedom was worth every single penny. If you enjoy spending time with quiet revenge, we would like to make a small request. Our team works carefully to select, edit, review, and produce each story. While AI tools may assist some parts of the process, every story is ultimately guided and checked by real people who care deeply about the quality of what we share. Since our YouTube monetization is not currently active, some viewers have asked whether there's another way to support the channel. If you feel comfortable doing so, you can support Quiet Revenge with the cost of a small cup of coffee. Patreon https://www.patreon.com/Quiet Revenge Family. Ko-fi https://ko-fi.com/Thestry Family. PayPal https://www.paypal.com/PayPalm/Kanhuangmin. Whether you choose to contribute or simply continue watching, we are sincerely grateful for your time, kindness, and support.